This is KPPQ LP Ventura, 104.1 FM, and we're in the Women's Room, where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good. My guest today is Rosemary Adams, an Irish author of 3 books of fairy tales, mysticism, and psychosis. She has a background in astrology, psychology, and legal translation. In the Women's Room is being recorded in London, England. And we're so happy to be able to meet with you here in London today, Rosemary.
Hi, Kathy, and hello everybody there in the Women's Room. I'm really delighted to be on, and it's very good of Kathleen to have me on.
Now, let's just jump right in here. Why did you become a writer?
I am a writer by birth. I think certain things are bred into us, and because I like language and have worked with languages over the years as a translator, writing for me is very important, and finding the right combination of words is pretty important as well, as you can imagine.
Okay, so you write about mysticism. Let's well, very importantly for our listener, tell our listener what a mystic is.
Well, a mystic is something that I couldn't find another word for anywhere else. It means being in touch with spirit, but in a way that perhaps is not commercially viable. I'm not a medium. I don't see dead people and I don't talk to dead people, but I'm connected with spirit, and I do get messages through quite often, and spirit can push. If it wants something achieved, it will push in quite a considerable way.
So do you think, just off the cuff here, that spirit is kind of connected to creativity?
I think spirit is connected to all of us, but possibly highly creative people are more able to pick up on spirit. All of us will get signs and symbols, messages through notice boards and things, but some very creative people, I think, pick up more readily on matters of a spiritual nature. And it would help if I said that I was clairaudient. I think that's the right word. I hear spirit coming through. Apart from visions here and there, that is the way it comes through to me, in a hearing fashion.
You also talk about how much fun it was to write these books and how they are written with humor. Has writing these books caused any changes in your life?
Not yet, but we live in hope. I've enjoyed writing them, and I enjoy publicising them, and newspapers locally and here too are very good. So, yes, for me it's just very satisfying. There's something that I want to say with them. Each and every one of them is similar in that they all have a theme of spirit running through them, but it's couched in different ways, and I hope always with humour, because it's pointless writing something about spirit if it's deadly dull and people think, oh, you're on a track and you just want a polemic. Whereas if you can put it out in a way that is very interesting and satisfying in itself for the reader to read, like Temporary Periods of Joy, it's a very satisfying book, even if you just read it as an adult fairy tale. It's funny. You don't need to go any further than that into it, and really, why would you, you know?
Okay, well, let's go back a little and find out a little bit about where you're from and your background.
Okay, well, my background is Irish, as you can hear. It's Northern Irish from the northwest. I grew up in Derry City, which is a city that's very renowned for creativity and music. It's a very musical city. It's the only entirely walled city in Ireland.
Oh.
It's a very old city, and its name in Irish, Dara, means Grove of the Oaks.
Oh.
So it has a most lovely river flowing through it, and it has oak trees along one side. And at night the crows fly home to roost. These are images that I use in writing, not necessarily in the books but in other things, and they mean a lot to me because it has a very mystical feel to it that some other towns might not have.
So how did you develop an interest in astrology? It's something I've kind of always played with and had some fun with, but you've gone into it a little bit more. Tell us.
I have. I put it off until I was in my 30s, but I was always very interested. I think we come in born as astrologers. I've come in with Neptune splattered all over my chart, if that means anything to any of you who are interested in astrology, and that is the planet of mysticism. But because in the era I grew up, I was expected to conform a great deal, I didn't truly follow it through until I was in my 30s.
Okay. But what was some early seeds? Were you interested in it as a young girl?
My grandmother gave me a book when I was a young teenager, which was a Victorian hardback book by a guy called Cairo. It's a very old book. And in it, there was all sorts of fortune telling. The Victorians used to read the shape of heads, and there were images of heads. There was a very little bit about positive thinking. It was at a very early stage then. And there were also some things with reading cards, astrology, so I fairly much devoured that. And then later, do you want me to go on later? When I bought and read Al-Quran, who was the original positive thinker. And he had a very simple book out on positive thinking. And as a teenager, I thought, well, right, his sample was a dish of fish brought in by a neighbour. So I thought, well, I'll focus on that. And I focused on it and focused on it. I gave myself a headache focusing on it. I don't think that's the way you're meant to do it.
So what, were you trying to conjure up a plate of fish?
I was trying to prove that it worked. You know, I was using his example.
Right.
It wasn't particularly that I wanted a plate of fish. My uncle would bring us up salmon from time to time.
Well.
He went fishing in the local river, but the neighbours never did.
Oh. Maybe it wasn't the right image.
Well, I don't think I was awfully good at it.
Well, has astrology helped you in your own life?
Yes, it has. I think knowing firstly that you come in with a set of patterns is very useful, because you might through life think, well, why is this happening to me in the worst moments? And to see that as a pattern between connected planets, one that can be explained objectively, is that you're living a life that has, to a certain extent, if not been planned, at least drawn out in areas that you're likely to experience. So that in itself, it means that you're less inclined to think, well, why shouldn't I be getting what other people are getting in some senses, because you yourself and each of us have huge abilities, but they're all different. So in a sense, you can't look at someone else and say, I'd love to be like that, because you are as you are when you come in. And we make the best of what we've got, and sometimes we fail to, but if you've got a talent, try to explore it, because that is a great gift.
So in an odd way, that's kind of reassuring that we can't be all and everything. We're kind of diagram, perhaps, to be interested in radio or be interested in astrology.
Yeah, and we're often interested in what we have an ability with. Even if it is a strange thing. As a child growing up, astrology was considered very odd, but it's a gift that we come in with, and I think it's worth. We never truly feel ourselves if we don't explore the gifts we have. We will always feel we're conforming to somebody else's plan for us. So I think you'd probably agree, Kathy. It's better to follow up what's right for you.
Exactly. I've tried to live my life that way. Well, let's take a look at your second book, Temporary Periods of Joy. Now, it uses astrology as a driving force in the book. Now, how did you incorporate your own studies and work with astrology into the book?
Well, as a fairy tale, it has astronomers, and astronomers in those days were always astrologers, and they were in charge of royal marriages. So I had a royal heroine, Ecclestica, who marries several times. Great drama ensuing. And unfortunately, the Institute of Astronomers, who are the astrologers, of course, had predicted a happy marriage for her. So their career could go down the tubes, as Ecclestica wasn't particularly happy when husband number 2 hit the blocks and disappeared.
Well, we don't want to give the rest of the book away.
Well, you can't give the rest of the book away. It's quite funny. And the astrologers or astronomers are deeply concerned that their institute could suffer as a result of this malfeasance on their part, I think.
Okay. Now, you've written altogether 3 books.
Yes.
Let's look at your latest. Grainne and the Divine Feminine. I keep wanting to pronounce it differently. And that's the Irish.
Grainne's an Irish name. Yes, I wanted to look at spirit and how spirit comes through. So in a sense, Grainne is my story, but I've couched it as fiction. And as a young girl in Galway, which is the west of Ireland, Grainne decides to go on a spiritual path and to look at the reality of life and the different areas that is shown in. She doesn't just deal with mysticism. Grainne actually looks at science and at astronomy. And astronomy nowadays, in fact, the astronomers, the scientists are saying that we live in multiple universes that are possibly all going on at the same time. Now, to my mind, that's an even more extensively difficult concept than astrology.
Yeah, that is.
It is. Astrology has us all just here. Okay, it's karmic, so you assume that there's a progression of lives and you've come in with gifts from previous experiences, perhaps, and things that you need to work out. But with the astronomy that they're presently putting forward, they assume that we've got a variety of multiple lives where each thing from one life to another changes minimally until we come round full circle. Now that's very complex. I find that extremely difficult to grasp in real terms, to look at and to think about. It's mind-blowing.
So in your writing about it, is this an attempt on your part to understand spirit more?
It's more an attempt to put forward things that I've learned through life and to have someone else look at them in a humorous way. So in a way, it's like teaching almost in a very humorous and storified way.
So, of course, no one of us is divine. We're just human. So why is it important to have an ideal, a divineness to look at and to aspire to? I mean, that's the way I see it, but perhaps
I'm not really sure. Let's not go too deep into it firstly, but basically I think we're all divine. We're all sparks of spirit. And that we come in en route to developing ourselves our understanding of spirit better, that we're moving towards a deeper understanding of spirit. But ultimately, it's quite problematic because I don't see why spirit should want us to improve. If spirit is all powerful, why should we have to improve? Why couldn't we just come in perfect in the first place and enjoy it?
I know, that sounds easier, doesn't it? But life, we all say life is hard, and it is.
It is hard, yes. Yeah, it is. It goes through periods. Some periods are happier, some are difficult. I've lived through some very difficult times with psychosis. I went off the edge completely into mysticism at a time when my chart would indicate it, actually.
Wow.
And lived through different realities, and those realities to me were stunning. They were intensely beautiful, but they required intense courage, and the intense courage that I had to come through that came from faith.
Faith in
came from faith in spirit.
In spirit, not particularly in organized religion?
I don't believe in organized religion. They change them from time to time. Each religion has rules and regulations that are restrictive.
And you don't believe in restriction, or there should be restriction?
I don't believe in being told what to think. I think they're interesting in themselves as cultural events, religions. They're different depending on your cultural environment. A lot of them are denigratory, that is, they're not very supportive of women, because in the last 2,000 years, a lot of them have been male-based, male-oriented, male-led. And in fact, Grainne, as a book, looks at how the church has treated women over the last 2,000 years. Not a treatise, my history isn't brilliant, but I picked out the bits that I know down the centuries, and Grainne looks at these and says, well, we weren't treated very well, were we? And the church people that she's speaking to in the book tend to agree.
So the whole idea of feminine power is very timely right now, and of course is something we're really interested in the women's room. Now, is your way of looking at the divine in women, a way to get in touch with that feminine power that women have been and are still struggling to bring into the open and exercise?
No.
No.
I can't say it is, Kathy. I'm not a feminist per se. I'm not an anti-feminist either. I think that we're females second and we're souls first.
Oh, interesting.
As females, we've been held back by 2,000 years of male-dominated religious thinking, so that's important to deal with that in the real world.
And we have to take a break for a station ID. This is KPPQ LP Ventura, 104.1 FM, and we're in the women's room, where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good. My guest today is Rosemary Adams, Irish author of 3 books we'll be discussing. In the Women's Room is being pre-recorded in London, England. And we're back with Rosemary Adams. So, Rosemary, we left it at, Rosemary, by the way, is an astrologer and a writer, and we've been talking about how she integrates astrology that she has used and currently uses into her books. And we were talking about Regulus, who is an important star and a fixed star. So I'll give the mic to you and tell us about Regulus.
Hi, I'm back. I'm not going to belabor the heavy-duty astrology, but it is important because Regulus moves every 2,000 years, and it has just changed sign from a very masculine-dominated sign of Leo, and it has now moved into Virgo, which is the Earth Maiden. Virgo is connected with Ceres, which has to do with the harvesting and sheaves of corn. And you can see this already in our increasing care for the environment and the fact that the earth itself is groaning under what we're doing to it, and the seas as well. So the fact that Regulus, which is one of only 4 royal fixed stars, it's called the Watcher of the North. They have beautiful names.
Yeah.
And Regulus is now into Virgo, which is my sign, by the way. So anyone with the start of Virgo prominent will be feeling it particularly. And Regulus now is in a feminine sign. And I think after 2,000 years of male-dominated religion, with Regulus and Leo being the sign of the Sun King, if you think of Louis XIV, but also of Christ figure, it ties in very well with that. But it's now shifting to the Earth Goddess. And I think that more and more the goddess and the priestesses of the past are in ourselves making their way back.
So what do you mean by a soul moving through the astrology? I don't know.
I know.
The terminology
I think
here.
at one stage I said that you asked me about how I experienced mediumship or mysticism, and very occasionally I might have souls moving through. This is very exceptional for me, but spirit comes in a lot of different ways. A medium would say that a spirit is passing through, and usually I'm just doing my ordinary day-to-day things, and suddenly I will burst into floods of tears, but these are very beautiful tears. And for a space of about 4 minutes, a spirit moves through, and the spirit itself is detached. It is a very, very light energy, a very beautiful energy. I don't know who it is. I can only assume there's a personal connection. And the spirit itself, it is very hard to tell whether it's male or female. And I think this is important, goes back to what I said earlier, that we're really not that different from men. It projects differently in the real world, but as spirits, it's difficult to tell the difference. And there is a great lightness and detachment there. And the spirit's regrets pass with it. but they're not really attached to. It's like a spirit traveling through and carrying a handbag full of regrets, but the handbag doesn't really affect the spirit, which is nice. So you can be as awful as you like during this life. It'll go with you, but it won't affect you, if you know what I mean.
That's really interesting. So you talk about the divine feminine to you is the return of the goddess. Now, how does that relate to some of the myths in our culture and Glastonbury that you talked about?
For me, in particular, with the book Grainne and the divine feminine is partly set in Glastonbury. Glastonbury,
which is a real place.
Is an area in England. It's in the southwest of England, and it's a very mystical place. And it celebrates the divine feminine. It always has, even when it was out of step with the times, and now it's very in step with the times. There's a chalice well where the water flows down over stones into a circular well. The images are very feminine. They're to do with the womb and nurturing. It's the most beautiful place. And at the solstices and the equinoxes, the men and the women of the area go up to the chalice well, which has a symbol of Pisces on the top covering, which is the Christian symbol. Although Glastonbury itself is connected to England's Arthurian legends.
And the Lady of Avalon.
And the Lady of Avalon, who is the lady, the priestess, the goddess, whom the priestesses of Glastonbury celebrate and live in tune with. So there they celebrate the land, and there's a mound in Glastonbury. Somerset's quite flat. They grow willows along the rivers. It's flat and it's prone to flooding. And in the Arthurian legends, the mount on which St. Michael's Mount, which you can see for miles around, was said to be an island to which Arthur and Guinevere, Arthur travelled in his final moments, and it's where the Lady of Avalon received him. It's highly, highly connected with English folk legend and the whole underlying Arthurian legend, which is really the core of Old England, if you like. It's what England is built on.
It was their sort of religion.
The first and only king. It was the coming of England as a creation. So it's very English. And you can see this mountain. It's very phallic, is what I'm trying to say. There's St. Michael's Tower on top of the mount.
And that's called the Tor.
The Tor.
Yes, I've been there.
Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it?
Very much so, yes. So is there some autobiography in the book or in Grainne, and how does this relate to the Glastonbury?
Grainne is really myself. It's the story of my spiritual journeys, but I've couched it in such a way that it's very readable and that it's fun. She's a young Irish girl looking through spiritual matters. Some of the events she lived through, I've lived through, even though they seem unlikely. But it does continue her journey. And towards the end of the book, the older Grainne comes in, which is really me. And I couldn't get away from that because I wanted to talk about the astrology of coming years. And Grainne, as a young person from the west of Ireland, was too young at that stage to talk about it. But yes, in my own sense, of wanting, I wanted to explain what was going to happen over coming years because it's a very treacherous time that we're living through. It's quite a difficult period of few years where astrologers are concerned. So it's important, I think, to get a spiritual message out there, but I did also want to explain the astrology of the next 2 years and how problematic this could be for our world structures, governments, banks, finances, and the environment, and we're all aware of that. We can see...
Right, we see it every day.
We can see structures crumbling around us, and if they're crumbling, it's because they're well overdue to crumble. Is there anything you want to ask? I don't want to dwell too much on the astrology because it's quite a specific, but is there anything you'd like to ask about that?
About the astrology, I guess... that all of these things that you're talking about seem to be manifesting themselves. But perhaps you might want to describe Glastonbury a little bit more for our listener who hasn't been to England and loves the Arthurian tales. And there is some relationship the Kennedy administration in the 60s was called Avalon. That's, very interesting.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, again, it's the place of Arthur and Guinevere and the legends. And Merlin, Merlin is very venerated in Glastonbury. People, in fact, dress according to the country, so that a lot of people are dressed in woolen clothes and country gear, and have lovely little children with them, with tousled hair. It's an old medieval type winding street with the abbey at the bottom, and it's the abbey where Arthur is said to be. King Arthur is said to be buried. I doubt that myself.
And was that abbey, was that one destroyed during the reign of Henry VIII when he was trying to break the power of the Catholic faith?
Yes,
and
the dissolution of the monasteries. He destroyed a lot of monasteries, but it has been very, very beautifully redone recently.
Oh, I haven't been there in many years.
30 years ago when I went, it was mainly just a shell. And to a degree they've left that, but they have absolutely renovated the kitchen area as it would have been and where the monks would have eaten. So it was a monastery, really. And the grounds are most beautiful. And on a summer day, you've got the yellow golden stone and flowers and ivy winding round and the bees buzzing. It's very somnolent, Glastonbury. It's very low-lying, and so it's very lazy. The air is very heavy. You feel sleepy immediately you get there.
I feel very relaxed listening to you talk about it.
So the book is partly, Grainne moves to Glastonbury and lives there for a few years, and during that time she learns a lot about the energies of the Lady of Avalon and the changing seasons and how we're interconnected with the play of seasons. And eventually she will learn about the sun and the moon and the connection perhaps between our bodies and the planetary systems, but that is something that she comes to later in life.
And we have to take a break for a station ID. This is KPPQ LP Ventura, 104.1 FM, and we're in the Women's Room, where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good. My guest today is Rosemary Adams, Irish author of 3 books we'll be discussing. In the Women's Room is being pre-recorded in London, England. Rosemary, I wonder if you would acquaint our listener with the process you use as a writer. For example, how do you go about putting a book together? Do you write first in longhand or compose on the computer? Do you use an outline? Do you see the story as a whole to find out about the plot? Or do you find out about the plot line as you write and create?
I start with an idea, Kathy, and then I just start writing. I'm used to that as a translator. I just got up every morning and sat down and started writing. So I use the computer, and I spend a lot of time, because words are important to me, trying to get the right phrase. So often ideas or phrases come to me in the middle of the night or just waking, and I note them down. They always say to do that does work.
So you keep a notebook right there by your bed?
Right by the bed. In the middle of the night, I'm up with a phrase, and until I find the pen, I can't go back to sleep again. But I do get stuck, and I find that I generally get stuck in the middle of the book because I've no set plan. I know what I want to say, but I've no set plan about plot. It really depends where your characters take you. So in the middle of the book, I wake up and think, how on earth am I going to get out of this? How am I going to get to the end with the heroine still with the man she loves, when I've written a male character that's a bit flighty, and likely to take off at the drop of a hat? And then there's the thing of, have I called people by the wrong name?
Oh, that's interesting.
Or have I put them in the wrong town, which does happen occasionally, because you've got nobody there doing continuity for you. You've got to think, and I don't have a list up, like one of these suspects lists where you've got all their details.
Right. Good example.
I don't keep that. It's all in my head, so I have to try and stay fairly convincing. So it's quite tough in the middle until I can find a way of untangling the plot, I'm often stuck for quite a while, and then it's lovely when it gets going again.
And then I imagine it becomes very satisfying.
It is satisfying. It's fun too. And when you find a way of expressing something that you like and makes you laugh, you hope that it'll make other people laugh too.
So, well, let's just go back to Grainne. Now, how did you develop the character of Grainne?
Well, Grainne's Irish, as you'll have gathered, and she's from the west of Ireland, which is not where I'm from. I'm from the northwest, from Derry, but I set Grainne in Galway, which is middle west on the west coast. The reason I did that was it's a sort of homage, really, to a period in my life, if you like. When I was younger, I shared a house with lovely girls, and a lot of them were from the west coast of Ireland, from County Clare and from Ennis in particular. And they spoke a beautiful West Country Irish English, if you like, with phrases that I was not familiar with, and with a lovely lyrical cadence to their voices. So having lived in Dublin for many years, I'm used to the Southern Irish way of speaking. And so I've incorporated that, because for me it's very satisfying to speak in a different language, if you like. It's very easy to read, but it's a different way of speaking English, and I think it's a very lyrical one. So this book really is my homage to those girls and how lovely they were. And of course there are characters here and there through the book that I've modelled on one or two people that I knew at that time, but not colossally so, just in passing.
So she starts as a younger girl and then moves on to the older woman.
She goes through most of the book where the younger Grainne is concerned is to do with her in her 20s and her progression through how much time to give to the meaning of life and how much time to jack it all in and go off to the pubs and try and look for a boyfriend. So it goes through her search for a boyfriend too. She's feisty, she doesn't suffer fools, and there's a progression too in her approach to life. She softens a little bit, and of course as she softens, her relationships tend to go better too.
Oh, so it's kind of common that as we grow older we soften a little, that we after our own sufferings we're a little kinder.
We get the egotism knocked out of us a little bit.
Well, let's move on in our last minutes here to your first book, I Know Where the Crows Fly, a book of home. And you mentioned home was Derry, and actually the old Gaelic term, say again about the crows flying.
Yeah, the Derry means the grove of the oaks, and so the crows fly home every evening at about 5 o'clock with a cawing sound, and they go back to roost in the trees on the bank of the river. For me, it's a very evocative title, and it means a very great deal because I have a great deal of nostalgia for the town I grew up in. There was a fair amount of trouble there during the Irish Troubles, and of course there's a religious element in growing up. I grew up as a Protestant in a Catholic area. I think I was very lucky to do that at a time when there was a lot of religious trouble. That gave me, I think, a great interest in mysticism, because the Catholic religion was a lot more mystical in its images than the Protestant one, and I was constantly surrounded by both.
And were you brought up Protestant or Catholic?
Yes, I was brought up Protestant, but of course the children I played with when I went home were Catholic, and their images were different to my images. Yeah.
Could you give us a little synopsis of the book?
Yes, it's my life history, and it is a history marked by psychosis. So this deals with the psychotic episodes in my life, which lasted for 12 years, quite a long time.
Oh my goodness.
In the middle of my life, I entered into a dark wood, as sometimes happens. Some of us get through it earlier on, but anyway, it was a very dark wood, but for me it was very satisfying because I wanted to explore the world of spirituality. I wanted to get closer to God, and of course with visions and miracles and voices going through my head constantly, it was hugely uplifting, but also paranoid psychosis is a very difficult thing to live through, because you believe always that you will be murdered, that you're being followed, that your death will occur in the most awful of ways.
Oh, how frightening.
And the only way I could get through this, I was self-employed, I really couldn't go for help, was because I had great faith in spirit and prayed to spirits all that time. And therefore for me it was a hugely set of spiritual experiences that did have a reaction in the real world. It wasn't that they were just going on in my head. They did actually, I sort of talk about this in more detail in the book. They did have a response in the real world. What I was going through was having a real effect on some things around me.
So the book is about your own experiences with paranoid psychosis. How did you find the courage to write the book when it exposes you so much? And I might say your willingness to talk about it. I commend you for that.
Yeah, well, it wasn't easy, and I wasn't sure. I wanted to write. I had written a book earlier, but I'd thrown it out because when I was going through visions and I put what do you call it when you remember poems of remembrance, songs of remembrance, I would lie on the living room floor and spirit would sing through me. I was constantly involved in songs of remembrance. These were very beautiful days, and each day when I was living through psychosis, I wrote a type of journal, a lyrical journal. But because the book was so immediate, I did try to get it published for a long time. But every time I read it, it was so painful to me because it was so stunningly beautiful, and I was no longer in that place. When I came out of psychosis, it was actually quite difficult because I came from a multicoloured world of vibrancy and terror and spiritual support and miracles and visions. I came down to the real world, which for me, by comparison, is very dull. And so I think I maybe moved off tack here, but I think the hardest thing in the world was coming back to normality, because while it has certain benefits, like you can earn a living and you're not worried about ending up in the gutter, as I was, it's a very dull world compared to the world of spirit, and it's always very tempting. I would think many people find this maybe to go back into a world of spirit where you are at least looked after by the medical fraternity. I think it's like a return to childhood in a sense. I'm not saying that was what it was, but when you come out of it, and like maybe any medical operation, there's a feeling of you might even quite like to go back in because you'd be looked after. Adult life is very demanding at times.
Right.
It's quite nice sometimes if you make yourself ill just so that someone can look after you, you know. And I think sometimes that's what illnesses can be about.
I remember when my dad had a heart bypass, and he was really angry about coming back because he was obviously in a place of great peace where he didn't have to struggle with the world. So I can understand what you're talking about there. So talk a little bit about your interest in the medieval saints and how that got you into a state of psychosis.
I think psychosis came because I wanted to explore the world of spirits. I overdosed on it. I'm pretty sure that's what it was, combined with quite a solitary job and a move to London, which initially was quite solitary too. So there was a loneliness there, and I overfocused. I think that's what drew me into psychosis. With the medieval saints, I firmly believe that most of the medieval saints were psychotics. Not trying to insult anybody's belief patterns here, but most of the medieval saints were out of it completely, and were seeing visions and hearing voices at a time and in a place. They were connected to the church, of course, where that was entirely acceptable in the medieval church. You have saints like, I think it's there's two Saint Teresa's, and there's Saint Therese of Lisieux, who had to be tied down because her hallucinations were so bad and her sexual urges were so strong that the church actually had to tie her down. I think I've remembered that correctly. So it moves through your body in great waves as well. It's not just your mind that's involved. Your body actually gets physically altered in some ways. Your sense of smell increases, mine did. Your eyesight obviously changes. Your entire body is involved, and I'm moving off track here slightly, but because I'm quite well read, having grown up in Northern Ireland, I'm very well read in biblical matters, and I know and I consider that the Book of Revelations is a beautiful book. It's stunningly well written if you read it, particularly towards the end.
And you're talking about Book of Revelations in the Bible.
Yeah, the New Testament. It's beautifully written by, I think, St. John the Divine. Now, St. John the Divine was out of it completely. He was totally psychotic. These are psychotic images. But it doesn't mean that it's not spiritual. The two go hand in hand. They're psychic and psychotic. They're very closely linked. And I would imagine that if St. John was around today, he'd have been banged up for part of his life.
Oh, really? Wow. So, I talk a little bit about, the terror involved in psychosis, that psychosis brings.
Bad enough so that I couldn't turn my head, I couldn't eat for days, I couldn't speak. I believed at night I would go to bed with a knife under my pillow because I wanted and intended to take my life during the night, but I was never strong enough to do it.
Thank goodness.
Well, you don't know. I might have gone into a very nice spiritual reality. But yes, in a sense, the terror is overwhelming. I would not be exaggerating it to say that my courage was astronomical.
Wow. So we just have a little bit more time here, but you mentioned that there's terrible prejudice to people with illness. You write about friends who have saved you. Tell us about them. How did you survive the bias?
I haven't really survived the bias, Kathy. It's very unfortunate. It's a big thing that I haven't dealt and come to terms with yet. I still get mocked, and it is awful that people would do this. Because I was living out like experiential medium, if you like. I was living this out. If I was told to contact people to get help with a book, I would go and contact them. There was usually some sort of connection there. I have been very badly mocked in the area in which I presently live. I've seen men stand at corners and point me out and mention to their girlfriends or their lady friends with them and laugh. And I find that absolutely abhorrent. And the other thing that I find really quite upsetting, and this would cover the medical fraternity too, is that their unswerving belief is that once you're psychotic, you're always psychotic. Once you're mentally ill, you're always mentally ill.
And that's not true.
This is not true. It may be true if you want it to be so, or it may be very difficult for you to shift. It took enormous courage to keep going on through all of this until the point where it burned out. But it's not true. You can recover. The problem is that people don't let you. They will come up to you, and 10 years down the road, you're leading your life normally, and you're thinking, I'm a mystic, I'm writing books, oh, aren't I great, how intelligent. And they'll come up to you and they say, are you all right? And you think, oh, God, not again.
Oh, no.
And they don't mean the best by it. It's a way of putting you down. It's saying, you're ill, you're still ill, we know you've been ill, you're likely to head off.
Thank you so much, Rosemary, for taking the time to meet up with me in London and tell us how you share your life experiences in the books that you write. We'd love to have you on the show again. Rosemary Adams has written Grainne and the Divine Feminine, Temporary Periods of Joy, and I Know Where the Crows Fly, a book of home. This is KPPQ LP Ventura, 104.1 FM, and we're in the Women's Room, where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good.